Urs, your bank and others, you're not necessarily going to be suddenly financing SMEs in Europe, let's say, but going to the CMU and this whole question of how you unlock finance and get past the regulatory complexity and try and get growth going, what are the bits of the CMU that you think will work and could work?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we would all agree that the CMU is a good thing to have. I mean, maybe too late. We may not be fast enough to do it, but I think it's clearly, given the market structure that we have in Europe, given the fact that we need to stimulate growth, it's something which has to be done. I think the two areas where this is, where I see this is particularly important, in particular also to stimulate SME lending. I think the securitization market is one of those areas where I think we have to make sure functions or starts to operate much better in Europe. That will require more than just just to say, well, now let's create the market. I mean, we'll have to have a certain framework that actually works for investors to believe that they can invest in those securities. There will, in my opinion, it will be a necessity that we have some sort of a rating system for securitization products that is actually credible and trusted. Otherwise, I'm afraid it will not work. I think hand in hand with that, we also will have to revisit some of the capital rules. If you have to underpin the purchase of securitization products by multiple of what you have to do with other assets, then it will not work. So I think we have to take the perspective of who are potential investors in those products and what do we have to do in order to achieve that. And then there's a lot of other things that I think a capital markets union will require so that it really works across Europe, and not just across Europe, but also in relation to foreign investors outside the EU that want to invest in there. That is something which obviously now in the consultation paper is addressed. But I would say that those two elements that I mentioned, the securitization market is one thing. The other thing is that we revisit some of the capital rules, particularly in the insurance sector, to make sure that we have that possibility. I think is important.
Jacques, SMEs and SME financing, picking up on what Urs was saying about how to, on the CMU, what bits can work, what bits can't work.
Well, I'm going to be a bit blunt on this and politically incorrect.
Excellent.
So like that you will be satisfied. I don't think the SMEs will be much better off with a capital market union for the following reason. In Europe, you have two categories of SMEs. You have the ones that are profitable and have no real problem in getting finance, either through banks or sometimes through markets and securitization. And you have those who are not profitable, and they have big problems in accessing markets and even banks. So the reason why some are profitable and some are not are complex, of course, but basically they are governed by the structural weaknesses or strengths of the countries in which they operate. If you have SMEs that operate in a country which is overextended in terms of public spending, which is very heavy in terms of social contributions, the fact of the matter is that those SMEs will not be really profitable and will wait for next week to get a little credit to bring them to the other week. And others, on the contrary, are okay. And therefore, if you do an improvement on the capital markets, you will perhaps facilitate marginally the life of those SMEs that are okay, and they will perhaps have a little more access to securitization and things like that, but you will not fundamentally solve the problem of those who are not okay, and because the structural problems are behind. So I would have conceived a bit differently the CMU. I think it's a good thing to improve on the quality of the capital market structures, rules, prospectuses and things. It's okay. And that's one of the horses that should be pulling the cart. But you have another horse, and that is structural reforms. Because if basically the clients of this beautiful capital market are not okay because they haven't got enough equity nor profitability, they're going to be out of the movement. So I would have added a structural element that would have been linked in a way, notionally, to the capital union thing. And I would have had a third horse, which is fiscal. We need a fiscal union in that system. And now if you had the three horses, I think they would be mutually reinforcing each other. If you only have one, well, it's not going to be optimal.
Okay. The three horses of complexity, we hope not. But Howard, CMU, your views on it?
Yes, I'm attracted by Jacques' tiercé, but I'm not a gambling man myself. I think that that Jacques is absolutely right that a lot of the issue for SMEs in Europe is not a question that can be dealt with by tinkering with finance channels. A lot of it is about demand, and it's about complexity of labor markets, and it's about the difficulty of setting up businesses country by country. I think that one thing the Commission could usefully do is to look at that area. I find that the Commission does not do, for my taste, enough comparative work looking at what works in different EU countries and trying to spread best practice. And a lot of the time, I think you could do more by spreading best practice than you can by starting from saying, let's have a rule and let's have a directive. And on that theme, I think what I would have liked to have seen in the Capital Markets Union is on the financing channel for SMEs, because I don't dismiss that that's a part of the picture. There are quite a lot of things that have been done in different parts of Europe. I obviously know more about the UK ones. In the UK we have things called venture capital trusts, for example, where there is a modest tax relief, but focused on investing in small businesses. And there's now a little industry of venture capital people who market these quite actively. Around this time of the year, as you're coming up to the end of the tax year, I get quite a lot of them coming at me. But some of them are pretty good. The British Smaller Companies Venture Capital Trust has been going for a number of years and has actually financed a lot of companies and is attracting investors who would not normally think that they're going to take a risk in a small company because they're grouping them into some degree of portfolio and some risk offsets. I think you could look at that and say, well, is that something which could work in other parts of the Union? In the UK, we're also looking, the government have initiated a scheme whereby larger PE firms can partner with the government in devising a fund to loan to small businesses where the business propositions actually come typically from accounting firms, where the small firms go. Again, that's at an early stage, but it strikes me as being potentially quite promising. So I would have liked to have seen a sort of tiré in the Capital Markets Union of looking at what works in different places and can we learn from those and spread them around, which would be, I think, often more constructive than the sort of rule-based approach that the Commission tends often to take. I do think, however, finally, that there is something needed on the regulatory side. We debated this over dinner last night, but in ESMA, I think one of Jacques' children has grown up very nicely. It's a well-run organization, has a good reputation, but I do think it could do more. And I think at the moment it's both too close to the Commission and too close to the Member States together, which is slightly difficult concept to understand. But it's too close to the Commission in the sense that it's very heavily dependent on the Commission for its budget and its staffing and its terms and conditions. On the other hand, it has a board made up of Member States people who vote, and ESMA itself doesn't have enough, I think, authority to impose a sort of central European approach. So rather than talk about a European SEC, which I hope we never see, at least on the model of the US SEC, I think you could beef up ESMA and give it more power to lead projects in the Capital Markets Union, which maybe it would, on occasion, initiate. But I think at the moment, it's not quite got enough independence and authority.
Jacques, you were nodding.
No, I agree with what Howard has just said. I think he's absolutely right. But you have to do it in a sort of an evolutionary way, because it's very difficult for that organization, before it has really gained, in a way, the international credit that it deserves, to enter into initiatives, because then you're going to have immediately the reaction of the political bodies of the European Union, Parliament, Commission, and Council, who say, you're getting out of your domain. So I think they have to gain their authority and then do the things you said. It will take some time.
Arlene, do you have a view on this at all?
On ESMA or on CMU or either?
Yes, first CMU, then ESMA.
Well, I don't think we should underestimate the complexity that it will take time to get a CMU off the ground, because in my view, if it had been that good an idea, why didn't we do it before? I mean, it's a kind of Johnny-come-lately in the sense that it's something that needs to be completed, achieved. In my role as president of the Internal Market Committee, we put through legislation to open up the services market, which was again one of the few freedoms. But it was a very, very difficult job, and it ran up against a lot of national, again, protectionism, that we don't want to open our market in this area because, thank you, we provide our own services very well, and this is jobs and businesses locally. And I think we will have to change some of the rules. I think we'll have to go back and revisit rules like CRD3, CRD4, because if you look at those rules, the incentives there are actually to invest locally and regionally because of the capital risk. So that's not an incentive for, UK companies. Certainly private equity companies will look at Germany. They see it as a strong economy. They see it as stable. They're not going to take a risk in Greece, quite frankly. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. We also then have silos. It's fine to say we are going to create the Capital Markets Union with all the kind of changes that will require in things like company law. But we had, in my region, in Merseyside, a fantastic special investment fund. It was funded through European structural funds. It was funding and setting up small businesses and getting them off the ground. It was very successful. And then it fell foul of EU competition rules. And then we had public procurement problems. So, you've got to let these things fly, and you've not got to fetter them with rules, I think, in other areas. And I mean, I just want to take a little bit of issue with Howard on the ESMA issue. I think it is I think someone last night said it's Jack's child, but it has been a bit of an orphan child. It's trying to get itself up and running, very poorly resourced. I mean, today I had an email saying actually they've got another cut back, but yet we're asking them to do more. We're asking them even also to look at equivalence regimes for Singapore and Hong Kong. How are they going to do that with very few resources? And member states' national supervisory bodies don't want to give them more resources because they feel they're a challenge and a competition to their rulemaking. And I think finally I would just say that don't underestimate the other power, because we had a recent situation which I thought was very interesting in terms of ESMA producing their guidance, their technical guidance to the Commission. The Commission chose to ignore that on some aspects of EMIR. When it then went to the Parliament for the final decision, the Parliament said, actually, no, we agree with ESMA. They got it right. You're not going to change it. And if you don't go back to what ESMA give you as guidance, we're going to block the whole process. And I think you will now find that the Commission will be rather reluctant not to accept some of the technical rules that come through from ESMA, with the view that actually they are strengthening their hand in the legislative process. And I think that's positive.